Welcome to this inaugural edition of Mind, Body, and Beyond. We are bridging the spiritual, the physical. We're going to be dancing within the body, outside of the body. JP Errico is with me today. Thanks for being here, JP.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You are quite welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about JP and a little bit about how JP and I met. It's kind of a fun story, but I'll give you a little bit of his background first. I was actually blown away by his credentials when I met him and then subsequently read his book, which we'll be talking about today. JP Errico attended MIT, receiving his science baccalaureate in aeronautical engineering. Then he went to Duke University, receiving a Juris Doctorate and subsequently publishing a book called Pacific Rim Intellectual Property Law. So obviously we got some legal lawyery stuff in there. That's an actual official term. He simultaneously completed his master's in engineering and then got a PhD in nuclear engineering. Went on to work at a New York patent firm, co-founded ElectroCore, and then wrote also in his spare time the Vagus Immune Connection, and also is a co-host on the Health Upgrade podcast. And he is I would say, and I'm probably, and you correct me if I'm wrong, JP, is like one of the biggest proponents, advocates, speakers on the vagus nerve and how important it is for our overall health, well-being, just the impact that it can have in such a profound way that people don't always recognize.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of voices out there talking about the importance of the vagus nerve, and I'll be modest and say I'm one of them. But I guess if pushed, I would say that given the fact that I've been sort of in this business for 20 years, working to develop technologies and understanding of how it works, I'm guilty as charged.
Yes, I do believe so. And it's what I find so fascinating is that what I notice in the work that I do as an intuitive coach, as a woman who also brings in the spiritual elements of work in the world when it comes to your physical body, how their physical conditions connect to traumas, whether your own or from an ancestral perspective. Epigenetics, we're talking about that a little bit earlier, plays a role in all of that as well. And the connections that are made, and in order to heal the body, both physically and emotionally and spiritually. And that's part of where I bridge that gap to connect some of those dots. And I think what your work is so fascinating, and something that you shared a little bit earlier, is that some of these physical conditions are connected to pretty much emanate from the brainstem. So we're going to be talking about that and how all of these different pieces of the puzzle connect together. And hopefully at the end of this, people will have a better understanding about the impact of vagus nerve stimulation and how it can positively enhance their lives, as well as a broader perspective about how our body works and how different aspects of our life that can really derail us or stop us from really being the person, the being that we're here to be, is inhibited by some of these physical things that show up in our lives. Now, I want to share a little bit about how JP and I met. I was invited to the Biohacker Expo in Miami this February. We're at the time of recording, this is 2025. So what I found there and discovered there were a plethora of incredible people doing incredible work, and meeting JP opened me up to something that I had never heard of before, which was vagus nerve stimulation. And he just absolutely wowed me in the conversation that we had with his knowledge, with his research, with his passion for getting this information out to people and creating a product that is small, that is powerful, and that is incredibly effective from mountains of research that he shares in his book, as well as online. So I tried the Truvega, and I'm going to show everyone what that looks like, because I feel like I like to be able to see things that really helps me have a a picture in my mind, and I really would love to show everyone what the device looks like, because I think, in this world of all sorts of different technologies that are available. What I love about the Truvaga is that it is small. It literally like fits in the palm of your hand. There are two versions, the Truvaga Plus and the Truvaga 350. I experienced the Truvaga Plus, which is this one here on the left. And the Truvaga Plus was basically this an electrical stimulator of the vagus nerve, placed it on my neck. I wish I had one with me. I could show everyone. Placed it on my neck. It was connected to an app on my phone. For 3 minutes, I felt this. It was almost like a little, like you were getting shocked by, electrical, like a shock in the winter when you're feeling like electrical shock. Oh, you touch something, you're like, oh, what is that? But this you're expecting, so it's not so startling. And you allow that to be placed on your neck for 2 to 3 minutes, and there's different settings. And doing this twice a day can, and again, there's reams of research that back this up, can enhance and really impact your life, not just your life in what am I trying to say here? Because it's such a rich work where it is affecting your brain, anxiety, depression, inflammation. JP, it's like so many different aspects of your physicality that are positively impacted by vagus nerve stimulation.
Yeah, and the reason for what you're saying being true is, and I always explain it to people, sort of taking it up to the 50,000 foot level and say, we're all blessed with having the most complicated machine in the history of the universe. It's our bodies and our brains, and we, unfortunately, while we're trying to make the best of it, we don't have an instruction manual. And, that instruction manual would probably be 1,000,000 pages thick and just the intro. And yet we're trying to figure out how to make it work. What I've, sort of gleaned from now 30 years in the field of healthcare is that there are basically just a few critically important systems that from which everything else on which everything else relies, and from which everything else stems. And they are your immune system. I mean, our immune systems actually literally build our bodies, build every aspect of it. I mean, from our brains to our bones, skin, eyes, teeth, everything is ultimately managed or actually constructed by immune cells. So our immune system is incredibly important. The second is our ability to create energy. And without energy, none of the biochemical processes in our body would happen. I mean, almost every single biochemical process that's important in the human body is an uphill battle. I mean, you got to provide energy to make it happen. And so we have mitochondria in our cells, and these mitochondria are these unbelievable, almost God-given little machines that create energy for us. They're miraculous. I mean, it's the greatest merger in the history of the universe that bacteria and mitochondria got together and decided to make a cell so that multicellular organisms could even exist. So cellular energy, the beauty and the mathematical precision and incredible complexity of our genetics, our genes. That's another really important piece of it. How we interact with our microbiome, all the little bacteria and fungus and viruses and yeast, et cetera, that occupy all of the areas that are not inside our bodies, but even our airways and our digestive tract are loaded with these bacteria and other single cell organisms and microbes that are critically important for how we function, and how we interact with them is something that's really important. But the most fascinating piece of it all is how we control all of it. And we control it and we manage it and we maintain ourselves in this homeostatic balance through our autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, which it's got two halves. One half is the sympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nerve chain, and the other side of it is the parasympathetic, which is your vagus nerve. And when you activate the vagus nerve, you are forcing yourself back into balance. Forces your your hormonal levels to balance, your neurotransmitter levels to balance, your cytokine levels, your adipokines, your endocrine system. Everything comes back into balance as a result of activating that parasympathetic, what I call parasympathetic recovery mode. And so vagus nerve stimulation, I wish I could say that when we first started in this space, that I knew all this. I knew next to nothing. I'm like the guy who literally stumbled on this and then just kept picking at it and saying, why? Why does it do that? Oh, really? It does that? Well, why does it do that? And how does that connect back to what we just were talking about? And once you start picking at it, it's like it's like putting that first piece of the puzzle of a 10 million piece puzzle. You put the first piece in and you got they click together and you go, that was cool. Let's do that again. I'm like the little 4-year-old kid who says, again, daddy, again, again. I just want to keep picking at this and figuring out, why does it work and why is it so darn important? And I got super, super lucky that I decided to start picking at something and pulling the string of this unbelievably rich tapestry that is explaining. It's actually writing most of that instruction manual. I feel like, I've said before, I feel like I'm Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree. And instead of getting hit by an apple, I got hit by a book. And the book is this million-page book. And it opened up in front of me. And as I'm like woozy and passing out from getting hit by a million-page book, I actually saw something that made me go, no way. Or as my daughter, is her favorite saying, it's like, wait, what? I felt like I opened the book and went, wait, what? And so I'm now in the process of going, like, for the millionth time, wait, what? And it's all fitting together. And so I just want to share that information with everybody and show them how, with really simple things that you can do. And some of these we've known for 10,000 years. I mean, yes, diet, exercise, and sleep. Yes, those are the three most fundamental things that you can do for yourself. Okay, why? Let's pull a string. Why? Why does that matter? Why can't I just go without a night's sleep? Yeah, I'll be tired the next day, but why not? Well, there's reasons. Okay, there's reasons for that, and we'll get into it. And why can't I eat junk food? If I just work out, eating junk food's fine. No, it's not. Not even close. And how come if I work out all the time, I can't lose weight? Well, there's a reason. Are you doing it the right way? Are you doing it the right time? Are you eating the right things? It all knits together. And vagus nerve stimulation turns out to be one of those things that really can help with all of those things and help you put your body into the mode. Frankly, it will help you age more slowly. It will help you reduce the rate at which, I mean, we're all going to age, but do you want to age more quickly or less quickly than the calendar? I want to age a lot less quickly than the calendar. I'd rather make it to 120 and still be able to play tennis, or go for a run than, be, 65 and, have to, walk around with a cane. Things that you do can change that. And so we're getting that word out to people.
Well, and I feel like in your book, The Vagus Immune Connection, there is a lot of science in the book, but there's also a lot of stories and a lot of pieces of the puzzle for people that they can connect to. It's funny. I was actually, when I was reading it, I said to my husband, I was like, I need to put this book down for a minute. Like, my brain can't hold any more information. He's like, wow, if your brain can't hold any more information, he's like, I can't imagine if I were to read it. It's like, there's just no way. And what to me was really impactful about the book is that it really touches on some of the most prevalent physical chronic conditions that are talked about and that people hear about this day and age. It's pretty much broken down here. I'm going to just share a couple of them with people. Type 2 diabetes being one of them, fatty liver disease, Alzheimer's, menopause, postmenopausal symptoms, which I wasn't thinking about when I was 20 something, but I'm now 50 something. And so those are topics of conversation amongst myself, my clients. And then also the epigenetics, headaches, anxiety, depression. Epigenetics, I kind of snuck into that. It wasn't really on that list, but I think that's another big topic of conversation that's been more and more in the forefront of scientists as well as the layperson who's kind of like, what is this about? What's going on? I think Bruce Lipton has been a big voice in that world of epigenetics and the connection with the brain as well, and his research in the brain studies. So there are people out there talking about this, and then there's plenty of people within the within more of like the yogic traditions that have been talking about not necessarily the vagus nerve, but about different types of breath work and things that you can
Oh,
do that have now been connected to the vagus nerve. So
for sure.
there's a lot of people dancing around, but I don't think that until I read your book, put it into a place of bringing the science, not so much the mystical, which is kind of the place that I spend a lot of my time, but bringing more of the science and the mystical that's on the periphery into the frame, into focus, and giving people practical strategies and research based evidence that this can help. And the other part of it too is that using a small VNS device, the Truvega device, twice a day for 2-3 minutes a day is something that I feel like people can get behind. It's not having to spend
Easy.
thousands of dollars. Yes, it's easy. It doesn't require a ton of effort. Like, I'm not a huge go to the gym workout kind of person. This though, I'm totally game for, and I do move my body physically, but I'm not necessarily going to go and do some of the things that people preach are the pathway to health and longevity. So I love that this is more of a very simple, easy, practical way to really shift and change your lives. And I have JP and I haven't been able to connect in order for me to get the device and try it out, but I'm going to do a follow up on this conversation and share my experience with it and what showed up for me. I got really curious about this sort of uh, support that's outside of the normal traditional realm of medical intervention. When I had a couple of different physical things that were going on, and inflammation was a huge piece of that for me, and I had to completely change everything about my diet. I took a lot of foods out, and I was very limited at the time. It was about a year and a half of this complete shift. And yes, physically, chemically, my body was coming back into balance, but I weighed less than 100 pounds. I was absolutely miserable. And I'm like, there's got to be a happy medium somewhere. I went totally in to this approach, which technically resolved the inflammatory issues, but I was not living life in a way that made me happy. And I feel like we can bridge that. We can find the things,
There are
maybe
ways.
cut out certain foods, but yes, you can still go out to dinner and enjoy a meal with friends. You can still have an occasional cocktail and it not be detrimental to your health for the next, 50 years. It's like doing the things that you enjoy. I also feel like there's that piece of the mind connection with that. If you have that one cocktail in a blue moon and you enjoy it and you're with people that you love and it feels fabulous to be with these people, and you don't think about it, this is going to hurt me, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be an issue. I don't feel like it has to be. Now, if that becomes a daily thing, then obviously yes, you're going to have some ramifications of that. But I also feel like your belief system, your mind, in conjunction with these small changes that you can make, are part of that reframe, reset of our experience in life. And I think we're here to enjoy it. However, we also need to have the information in order to know how to enjoy it prudently. And I feel like
Yeah,
that's
and
where this book comes in.
you want to be able to enjoy it while not having to do quite the same extreme level of, as you said, excluding things from your life and putting your body through having to drop below 100 pounds in order to reduce inflammation levels. There are
Yeah.
better ways of doing it. And
Yes.
just to riff off that one piece you talk about excluding certain foods so that you can reduce your inflammation levels. I have a great story that is just it dovetails exactly with what really was the initial impetus for me to get into this space to begin with. Um,
Ooh, do tell.
so, you know, not to go into the gory details because I do talk a little bit about it in the book, and people can read about it. We originally got into the field of vagus nerve stimulation to treat anaphylactic shock, and yes, vagus nerve stimulation absolutely does help with that. We actually could save animals' lives from what would be a lethal anaphylactic reaction by stimulating the vagus nerve. But it's just a funny story. I was at the beach in New Jersey, down the shore in New Jersey,
Yes.
with some family friends, and one of my wife's really good friends was at dinner, and I noticed that her name is Anne. Anne wasn't eating anything. She's from an Italian family. I mean, she knows how to manja, okay? And she was there, and she wasn't having any bread, and I noticed that she didn't order a pasta, and she wasn't interested in dessert. And so at some point in the conversation, even before dessert, I said, you know, Anne, what's going on? And she said, I've got a gluten allergy. I figured out I've got this problem with gluten. And I said, do tell. Tell me about what you're experiencing. And she said, well, I mean, my joints have been swelling up. I feel like I got hit by a truck. I'm swollen. My brain's foggy. And I finally just started cutting out gluten, and I found that I could live without it so much better. And I said, okay, well, if it's working for you. And she says, I hate it. And I said, well, what do you mean? She's like, I would do anything to be able to have pizza and, be able to, I have to, such a strict diet to get gluten out of my system. And I said,
Yep.
what would it be worth to you if I could say you could have a piece of pizza, you could have a piece of cake, you could have, some bread? She's like, I would do anything. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, at the end of dinner, I've got a device with me. I'm going to bring it to you, and we're down the shore. You're here for another 5 days. Use the device and see what happens. And so I gave her a device, and she went home, and she said, we met up a couple of days later. I said, what happened? She said, well, the next day I went out to dinner because we're down the shore. I went to dinner, and I decided I was going to have one piece of bread. And I said, okay. And what would normally happen? She said, listen, if I had even one piece of bread, I would have woken up, my ankle would be swollen, my elbows would hurt, my shoulders would feel like they got, I carried, 100 pounds around all day yesterday, and I'd feel crappy. I said, well, what happened? She said, I feel great. I felt great. I said, okay. So what'd you do next? She said, well, then I decided to really test it. I said, so what'd you do? She said, well, I went to the boardwalk and I had a funnel cake. And then I had 3 pieces of pizza. And then I went to dinner and I had pasta. And then I had cake for dessert. And I said, okay. I'm like thinking to myself, okay,
Wow.
this isn't magic. What did you, she said, I said, what happened? She's like, well, I woke up the next morning and my left ankle was maybe 25% swollen, the way, compared to what it would do. And I said, and what else? She goes, and that was it. Nothing hurt. I was fine. And I said, so it really does stop the inflammatory response associated with, now this is an N of 1, but remember the original work we did was in anaphylaxis. And if a gluten allergy is truly an allergy and your immune system is being activated into a pathological state, and we can block that. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that if you have celiac disease, because celiac disease, there's a
Right.
pathway to cancer as a result of that. But if you've got a gluten allergy and it really is affecting you negatively, I wholeheartedly encourage you to get a Truvaga, try it. If you want to spend less money, buy the 350, which is the disposable version. And if it works for you, what does it matter what it costs? As she said, I would do anything to be able to have a
Yeah.
slice of pizza and a piece of cake on, and some bread. She went hog wild in it. And I've seen this across the board in so many different things where there's something that sets you off. There's something that
Mhm.
sets you off, your immune system off, sets your metabolism off, it sets your brain off. Panic disorder, anxiety, insomnia, all of these different things, where what's causing it is the autonomic nervous system is perceiving a threat. When the autonomic nervous system perceives a threat, it doesn't care whether it's a lion chasing you or your boss chasing you. It doesn't care whether it's because you got hit by a truck or you stayed up all night. Your autonomic nervous system views a threat and it activates your immune system. And when your immune system is activated, you've got inflammation. So what we want to do is change the messaging, change the story, change what your body is responding to. And if it doesn't respond negatively, then you will stay in homeostasis more easily. And that's what you want. You want to stay in that homeostatic, comfortable state where your body is just moving along, functioning normally.
So, JP, along that same vein, would you say that the Truvaga would be used in conjunction with supplementation, for instance, because I know with a lot of integrative medicine, they bring in supplementation to bring the body back into balance or
Mm-hmm.
to support whatever organ function isn't really working optimally. Would you say that doing something like that in conjunction with the Truvaga would be beneficial, or would you say using the Truvaga would naturally bring the body back into that more balanced state without the supplementation in
That's a great
conjunction
question.
with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is a qualified yes. What I'm saying is there's a great integrative medicine physician who's working up in the Jupiter, West Palm Beach area in Florida. And the way she describes it to her patients is she brings them out, she shows them all the different supplements that she can give them, et cetera. She's saying, listen, I can give you all of this. Okay. But if your body is in fight or flight, if your mind and your nervous system is in a fight or flight state, sympathetically activated, then none of this is going to work because you can't simultaneously be in fight or flight and healing mode. You have to get your body back into healing state, at which point all of these things will be beneficial to you. But I can't use any of this until I get you into that healing state, into that parasympathetic recovery mode. So the number one foundational thing that you need to do is you need to use this Truvaga. If you use it, then all the rest of my stuff is going to work. Now, I have another Dr. Claronimos out on the West Coast in Portland. He had a patient with fibromyalgia. She was suffering for 10 years. It took him, probably half a decade to get her calmed down into a state where she was basically functioning almost normally. Had very little pain, very little problems. Everything was working perfectly. And then let's just say she got a hit of something that pushed her out of homeostasis big time. Turns out it was a booster shot of a vaccine. And she ended up completely dysregulated to the point where it was, listen, that's what the spike protein does. It just causes inflammation. And if you take a shot that's causing you to create inflammation, you're going to have a problem if you have one of these conditions.
Yeah.
And so she was completely dysregulated. And all of the things that he had been trying to use over 5 to 10 years to get her back, none of it worked. None of it was working. She was worse than she had ever been. At which point he handed her a Truvaga and said, use it. And she used it. And he would say that about 70% of her symptoms calmed down within a matter of about a week. At which point he then was able to use the rest of the things, and they brought her the rest of the way. So yes, other medications, other symptom relieving supplements, et cetera, can be beneficial, but none of them will work if your body isn't receptive to it. If as he said, if I'm fighting against the autonomic nervous system, I'm looking at a sheer cliff that I am never going to be able to scale. If you put the patient on the autonomic nervous system recalibration program of Truvaga, well, then it's like skiing down a bunny slope. It's easy. Now, Specifically, I do want to say one thing. One supplement that I think is really critically important and may actually control to a certain extent whether or not the vagus nerve stimulation is going to work is making certain that your microbiome in your gut is functioning properly.
Mm,
Because I remember the vagus nerve is also referred to as the brain gut axis.
yep.
Okay. If the gut is not functioning properly, if the gut is completely dysregulated, then I do think that the vagus nerve and the ability of the vagus nerve to control the system is impaired. So you want to get your gut microbiome functioning properly, and once you do that, and that's not that difficult to do. And I'm not saying you got to go out and buy 10 gallons of kombucha or guzzle yogurt cultures or anything like that. But that doesn't hurt. But feed your microbiome some butyrate, and some fiber, and get your microbiome functioning properly. At which point, yeah, I think getting your autonomic nervous system into balance will then balance your inflammation levels, will restore proper mitochondrial function. You'll have the right balance of autophagy and nutrient sensing, and you won't be sort of in this tension between, am I in anabolic growth mode or catabolic recovery mode, so, or healing mode.
And And
So
for those people who don't know what the heck JP just said, because it's all words that are probably above their knowledge, because they were until I read his book. It's basically when you're in your body is able to like kind of clear out the clutter, clear out the debris, and that would go through the microbiome to be released and to no longer be just hanging out in your system, causing disruption, causing trouble. And then being able to use something like the Truvaga to bring your body back into a state of homeostasis and a place of balance. And this talk is not an advertisement for the Truvaga. However, it is a very big piece of the puzzle, I think, for most people to be able to reset and to be able to stimulate their vagus nerve to impact their lives in a way that's supportive versus dysregulation, which isn't. And for me, I know one of the ways that I was guided to work with my vagus nerve was through breath work. Well, breath work for me can be really challenging and somewhat traumatizing unless it's very, very gentle. And I know a number of my clients, that's been the case for them as well. It's just not something that they feel comfortable doing. It's powerful, it's impactful, and it does work. But to me, there is a cost associated with it. And there's also a time associated with it to really reap the benefit of it. You're doing some pretty significant breathwork practices for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour or more. And really, so many of us are running around like crazy, and that's just not in the cards. Using something that is 10 minutes a day is or less seems like a really palatable option. And so I kind of want to shift. So do you want to something you
yeah, I was
wanted to
just
say
going
about
to say,
that, JP?
for 10,000 years, we've understood that the vagus nerve is important. We didn't know what the vagus nerve was, but we understood that things like breath work and meditation and things like Tai Chi and mindful walking and chanting and things like that have a very positive impact on the body. But you're absolutely right. These things take time. I sort of joke about the fact that using the Truvaga is you're getting 2 hours of meditation in 2 minutes. There's just no way that any of those things that we are trying are going to be as powerful as a Western electrical engineering, fully scientific way of activating the vagus nerve. There's just no physiological way to do that that's more powerful than an electrical device that sits right here on your neck on the nerve. It's just we're not
Yeah.
capable physiologically of doing it. That doesn't mean that those things aren't really important. In fact, one of the things that I would, I had the experience of going and running a marathon when I was about 30 something years old, maybe just before 30. I decided I was going to train for the New York Marathon. I run a lot, and marathons are just a really long distance. And I
Yes.
decided that I was going to train for a marathon. And I remember I was training with somebody else, and we went out And the training program works is you go out and you run on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You run sort of short distances, and then you take the day off on Friday, and then you go out for a really long run on Saturday. Take Sunday and Monday to do other things, and then start the next week up. So you're slowly building that Saturday run up to a really long distance. And we got to the point where we did a 10-mile run, which, now for me seems like it's a relatively easy thing to do. But at the time, I'd never run 10 miles before. So I went out and we ran 10 miles and we did okay. It was good. And then the next weekend, we had to run 13, which was kind of a big jump. And we went out and we ran 13 and it was terrible. I mean, it was awful. The last 3 miles, we completely bonked. We did the 10 miles, but by the end of the 10 miles, the next 3 miles, we ran at like a 15-minute pace. And I was thinking to myself, we haven't gotten halfway yet. I mean, with this marathon starting in early November, and I'm going to be done at Thanksgiving, and it was sort of this crisis moment. I said, we got to figure something out here. And I went online and I found another training regimen was being promoted by this guy Galloway, and he's pretty famous in the running world. And he had this Galloway technique, which was you run for 9 minutes and then you walk for 1 minute. And the way he described it, he said, listen, if you walk for that 1 minute, yes, it's slower than running, but you're still moving. And you might lose 30 seconds during that minute. But what you're doing in terms of allowing your muscles to recover during that 1 minute is so profoundly important that by the time you get 5 or 6 miles into your run, you will be running faster by such a margin that you will make up the time. And by the time you get to 15 miles, 20 miles, you're still running when you wouldn't be able to run anymore. And so I decided I was going to do this. And the next run was, I think, a 14 or 15 mile run. And I went out, actually, it was a 16-mile run now that I remember it.
Oof.
And I went out and I used this technique by myself because we were not running together that weekend. And I remember coming back with such a huge smile on my face. I had run it faster than I had run the 13-mile. And I said to myself, not only that, but by the time I finished the 16, I still could have done another 10. Using that technique, I knew we were golden. And sure enough, went out, ran the marathon, didn't have any problems at all. And it was a function of going out, running 9 minutes, walking for 1. And so I've now come 20 some odd years later, realized that that's what people need to do in their lives. They need to take 5 minutes at the end of every hour. And I say, listen, you're sitting at your desk, you're on the phone, you're on your computer, etc. Just set a little alarm. And when it gets to 55 minutes, 10:55, 11:55, etc., take those last 5 minutes, get up from your desk, do a little stretch, figure out whether you have to go to the bathroom, because there's nothing that's going to activate your sympathetic nervous system more than having to go to the bathroom or being thirsty or get a snack. Do whatever you need to do. Make a phone call home, call your spouse, call your loved ones, call a friend, make a plan for the weekend. Just get your mind off work for 2 minutes. Doesn't take much more than that. Okay. Then come the top of the hour, sit down and start doing work again. Yeah. You're going to say, well, in an 8-hour day, those 5 minutes add up. That's 40 minutes. I said, trust me. A, you're going to get so much more work done. B, your body at the end of the day isn't going to feel like it's been through hell. You're going to have more energy to go home for your kids, your friends, your spouse, whatever. You're going to have more energy. You're going to have more life in you. Okay. And you're going to enjoy things more. I get people within a week, they call me up and they say, I totally didn't believe you, but I tried it. And oh my God, it's life-changing. You've literally changed every aspect of my life. My work is better. I'm getting more done. I feel better. I'm not tired in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, all of these remarkable things happen just by giving yourself 5 minutes to recoup, to just reset. It's so simple and it's so profound.
Well, and taking that time, like you said, to take care of bodily functions, or just getting your mind off of whatever it is that you're doing for a few minutes. I think that we can get so hyper focused on things. And that's, I think, too, where we can get so hyper focused on the things that are wrong, which is really just exacerbating the issues that we have within our lives and our bodies. Um,
It forces
switching
us
gear.
not, it forces us not to move from one stress to the next stress to the next stress and make your body and your immune system experience chronic stress and chronic. Little stresses are not a problem. Little stresses are good for you. They have this
Yeah.
hormetic value, this like, I stress it and then I grow back stronger. Those are all good. But the moment you move from, home stress to work stress to school stress to work stress to physical stress to emotional stress, if you don't break it up, and it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. It's like the easy button. Just hit the easy button, spend 5 minutes doing something else that's fun, and then go back to work, and you will be so much better. We know about it in athletics. I just talked about it in running, but I mean, what happens? You take a breather. You come out of the game for 2 minutes. You go back in. You're fresh legs. You got your back. You're the best player on the court for the next 5 minutes because you're the one who got a break. We know that it works the same way for our emotions. It works for our brains. It works this. You can't remain in chronic stress mode without causing damage. I say, if I go out and run 3 miles, it's really good. If I go out and run 30 miles, I'm doing damage. If I go out and try to run 300 miles, I'm dead. Okay. If I go out and run 3 miles, if I go out and run 10 miles, that's a long run, but it's good. I built up to that. If I do that
Yeah.
once a day, I can do that for a year. I've been doing it for years. But if I tried to do all of it in one day, I'd be dead.
Well, and I think that kind of comes back to like bring it's the thought of everything in moderation, but it's also kind of the reframe and the reset around how we tend to live our lives. And small shifts can create huge leaps. Small
Mhm.
shifts can change our lives in profound ways that until we do them. And when I think we're also kind of programmed to think we have to do some grand great change in order to make a grand great change. It does it we kind of have this thought of it has to be hard or has to be huge in order for it to have an impact, when really it, oftentimes it can be the opposite of
It's the
that.
little things.
um, it is the little things. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit to something that really affects women more than men. However, men are affected in other ways, and that is menopause. What I found really interesting in your book was to hear about, and I've seen this too with the men in my life, that as they age, there are hormonal changes that occur, not as dramatic as women, but there are changes. But what did surprise me was that hot flashes, being one of the huge precursors and symptoms of menopause, can also affect men if they've had certain chemotherapy treatments
Hmm.
for prostate cancer.
Hmm.
I did not know that. I thought that was really, really interesting. And the reason I find it interesting is that the endocrine system, the whole operational system that of our bodies in profound ways. I don't think people realize how important the endocrine system is to the operation of our bodies. That with these hot flashes that are happening has to do with inflammation, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, and the
Big part of it.
cytokines.
Hmm.
And so, with a suppressed parasympathetic nervous system,
Hmm.
you're going to have an enhanced sympathetic symptomology, which would be hot flashes, for
It
instance.
affects it affects
Um,
your, it affects your temperature regulation centers in your brain in a way that can dysregulate temperature control. So you get these hot flashes and night sweats and other things, and those can be very rapidly regulated with vagus nerve stimulation. I can't tell you the number of people I know who, I family friend. I was sitting at a basketball practice for my sons. They've got a son who was playing basketball with my son,
mhm.
and she turns to me and goes, "Is it hot in here?" And I said, "No." And she says, "I just can't stop sweating." And then, I sort of looked at her like, okay. And then she said, "Oh, it's these hot flashes. They're just killing me." And I said, "Here, use this." And I pulled it out of my bag because I had one. She used it, and she looked at me like I, I had just performed a magic trick. She's like,
Yeah.
"That's crazy." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And she started using it, and she said, "The hot flashes are just so much less of a problem than I ever had them before. It's like," and she didn't say they were gone, but she said they were totally manageable. And and the reason why that's really important, and I think that's probably one of the things you were going to go to, is that the severity of the vasomotor symptoms. They're even called, vasomotor because you've got your vasovagal response, vagally motor, your dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus in your brain is involved. Um, but those symptoms are really important to monitor because if you have very severe hot flashes while you're going through menopause, you are at a much higher risk of experiencing some of the far more, not just uncomfortable, but really deadly
Yeah.
consequences of going through menopause that happen 6, 8, 10 years later. Things like cardiovascular disease and stroke, things like dementia, osteoporosis, and depression. If you if you are having severe vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats, and others, you're at a higher risk. If you can suppress those symptoms and block that inflammatory dysregulation that's occurring, and I would assume continue on using that vagus nerve stimulator, I suspect strongly, because they're all related, that you're going to bring down the risks of those other things. And we know that vagus nerve stimulation from animal models and animal testing, it can prevent some degree of osteoporosis. I mean, we can prevent. Listen, the cells that break down your bone in osteoporosis, the cells that become activated and start breaking down bone more aggressively, are called osteoclasts. They're immune cells. Those are
Mm.
immune cells. They're the immune cells of your bone. Okay. So, what happens in cardiovascular disease? It's the immune cells that are in your arteries that are becoming activated and causing plaque to form and problems with your atherosclerosis and your cardiovascular system. Same thing with stroke. Same thing with dementia. It's all about your microglial cells. What's happening with and those are the immune cells of your brain. How depression, it's about, are you making enough serotonin? How are your neurotransmitters balanced? Are you making enough of them? Are you making enough
Mhm.
melatonin for sleep disruption is a big problem for the aged, for the elderly who are having difficulties with neurodegeneration. It's all a function of how those immune cells are functioning. If you can bring them back into that balanced state, that homeostatic state in the brain, the neurotrophic state where they're actually helping your brain function, not hurting it, then you're like you're going to age gracefully. You're going to age slowly. You're going to have a healthy happy retirement. You're going to be playing tennis at 80, 90, 100 years old. That's what you want to be doing.
Well, and I bring up the whole menopause topic for a number of reasons. One, because it's something that is showing up a lot in my circles. I personally believe that it's kind of comes back down to belief and what you subscribe to. I haven't really had much in the way of issues recently with that. There were like a little things, but that was completely stress induced. It was during a really traumatic time in my life. I think it threw me into it. And then I found different ways to bring myself back into balance, probably because I was in fight or flight, which is why it was activated. And now I'm not in that state. I'm definitely more in that rest and digest mode within reason. Um, but when it comes to mood disruptions and dysregulation, sleep dysregulation, the hot flashes, finding those places where our hormones really are out of whack because of aging and maybe lifestyle, because of a number of other factors that might be happening in our lives at the time. This to me is really, really such a blessing that I would love for more women to realize is available for them, because they're doing things like bioidentical hormones, which I'm sure are helpful, but is it necessary? Really? Are there ways that we can bring our body back into balance without putting something into our system um, that could potentially cause problems later, like cancers, by putting estrogen back into our bodies at a time when really our bodies are really needing to dial that back a little bit. We're shifting gears. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any real background in that. It's just the sense that I get that for me personally, it's not something that feels like a healthy or sustainable or
It's certainly not risk free.
yes, exactly. So this to me feels a lot more optimistic. And yes, you are correct in terms of where I was going to take the conversation, is that realizing that these symptoms have a direct correlation with very serious health impacts later in life. It made me realize, like, okay, if I could do something really simple now to mitigate that later or reduce the risk of it later, it's almost a no-brainer.
Yep.
I think in the book you talk about the things that you do when you're at a certain age are affecting you. I think it's like, so the things you do at 20 are going to affect you when you're 40. The things you do at 40 are going to affect you when you're 60. And, I think we think about that in some terms, but I mean, for me personally, I'll admit, if it's not affecting me right now, I'm not really thinking about it, but
Right.
I am now, because I see the long-term effects. I think also as we age and we see our parents age, for instance, I'm looking to my parents, my father who's no longer with us, and my mom who is in her mid 80s with a number of chronic health conditions. Okay, I'm learning from them the things not to do and the things that would be beneficial for me to do based on what they didn't do. And that I think is also really great. I say often, anyone who watches me regularly knows we learn from one another. So, we're learning from you, JP, right now with this conversation. And I was learning from my parents, just watching some of the things that they have done. And we can take that in and not say, okay, because they had it, this kind of brings in the epigenetic conversation, because they had X, Y, or Z means that I'm destined
Mhm.
to. No, not necessarily. So it's that shift in both mindset and the way that we are living our lives. How can we support our health and well-being now in order to create the optimal environment for health and well-being later? I think is really, really important, while also balancing that with not taking it too far, like we talked about earlier, and like I did with the dietary changes, striking that balance, finding that pathway that you can still live your life and enjoy your life and do the things that you really, really find connective for you and expansive for you, and also supportive for your long term health.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
think that's exactly right.
So I want to just touch on the epigenetics, and then we're gonna wrap up here. What would you can you give us like a just a short term takeaway when it comes to epigenetics, maybe a definition in your mind of epigenetics, and how that can positively impact our well-being going forward, and not necessarily have to follow the same path that our parents and grandparents did, and how this is a huge question, and how their experiences also impact us now, whether we're consciously aware of it or not.
Sure. So just maybe start with the definition.
Yes.
I think everybody who's had high school biology at this point sort of understands what genetics are. Genetics is, every cell in your body that's got a nucleus has a set of our DNA. It's 3 billion base pairs long. It's a code. It's coding for proteins. It has genes, embedded in it, and the genes are sequences that help our bodies, our cells make proteins. But every cell in your body has exactly the same DNA. So you have to ask the question: what makes a nerve cell different from a kidney cell, different from a liver cell, different from a skin cell? How do they differ? They differ because during the process of what's called differentiation, moving from a stem cell that could be anything, a pluripotent stem cell can be anything, down to the point where it's a fully differentiated specific cell type, skin cell, a nerve cell, etc. There's a process by which DNA that isn't useful for that particular type of cell gets packed away. It gets packed away in multiple different ways. So epigenetics actually covers multiple different mechanisms, but the big ones are what's called DNA methylation. And by methylating the gene, you sort of lock it away. Another thing you can do with a gene is all of the DNA is wrapped around proteins called histones. So, the chromosomal structure that we're used to seeing is sort of DNA all packed away in this tight packaging that involves these proteins that it's wrapped around. These proteins can be modified by sticking little chemical additives to them, and those are called histone modifications. And those modifications can change whether or not a gene is readily available to be read and opened up, or it stays locked away. All of these different tools are what we call epigenetics. These are the system of control on what genes are actually available to be used and what genes are used when they're used to allow individual cells to behave differently. So all of those mechanisms are evolving through our experiences, our individual experiences. What's happening now in our lives? Is it nighttime and we're sleeping, or is it we're standing, at the starting line of a race that we're about to start? Are we working hard, late at night and not getting sleep, or are we, sitting down for a feast at Thanksgiving? I mean, all of those different states are things that our cells need to recognize and then modify how those epigenetics are working. Now, one of the things that that we've seen and we understand, we don't fully understand it, is that very severe things that happen in your life, traumas or periods of starvation, can put permanent changes to your epigenetic profile. If it happens before you've had children, those that imprinting that occurs through epigenetic mechanisms can be passed on to the child. And so, for example, if you went through the Holocaust, there's identifiable traits that, as a result of epigenetic changes, now affect the children and the grandchildren. Um, it lasts typically it lasts for 3 or 4, maybe 5 generations maximum. By that point, largely it gets washed away and diluted down. But there's an evolutionary reason for this mechanism to exist. If you live through a famine, you want your children to be able to survive better in a famine situation. So we're genetically altering them so that they have different metabolism as a result. Or if you're an Eskimo and you live in an area where it's extremely cold, well, you want your children to be able to survive in cold environments more easily. If you transplant that person to Florida, that person isn't necessarily going to have the easiest time because they're epigenetically programmed to be in a cold environment. Will their grandchildren or great grandchildren have that problem? No, that will wash away. But epigenetics is a really important thing, and one of the things that's an area of great interest for me, and it's also in the literature, is how do other systems that are part of our bodies, immune system, how does our metabolism, and how does our autonomic nervous system affect that epigenetic pattern? Can we control that epigenetics in some way, in a positive way, to benefit us? And there's research that shows that vagus nerve stimulation in stroke, for example, in a stroke situation, or in Alzheimer's, or in metabolic disease or atherosclerosis, that there are changes, epigenetic changes, that vagus nerve stimulation can trigger and can cause that cause a positive outcome for those conditions, reducing atherosclerosis, reducing the risk of a stroke, reducing the damage done by a stroke, reducing the risk of Alzheimer's. And so, yes, I think there's a really exciting research being done trying to figure out how the autonomic nervous system, the vagus nerve, parasympathetic recovery can impact things through mechanisms that we didn't know before. And this circles all the way back to what we talked about even before we got on recording, which is, there's a lot of things out there that are being observed. As you said, they may not be quantifiable yet, but they're undeniable. And we
Mm-hmm.
know it. And we need to, as a society, respect that knowledge, even though it doesn't yet have a scientific underpinning. And my mission is to be sort of a bridge, taking those truths that we know, whether it's historically passed down, et cetera, and give it that scientific grounding, because for two reasons. One, so that everybody will understand and believe it, but also because it's such an incredibly wealthy area to dive into, because God knows how well we're going to be able to leverage that knowledge into other things that we didn't know. I mean, it's just a great way to sort of paint that rich tapestry of life that we are trying to, trying to fully understand.
Yeah, I love what you were saying though about how these pieces of history in our families that can be carried through to help us, like support us as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
Your grandparents and your great grandparents. There's like, to me, almost like this sort of comfort to that. And I have still have a really tight relationship with both of my grandparents that are no longer physically with us, and they're guiding me. My father, same way. And to know that there's like this part of them that exists within us, and that they have helped us even before we came into the world, to me, it's just really cool. It's just really, really cool.
It is. It
Um,
also lays a bit of responsibility on us all to make certain that, if we haven't yet had kids, or if we have kids and what they're doing, is to make
yeah.
certain that we do everything we can to make certain that their epigenetic profile is healthy. We know that if you mistreat your child, the chance that your child is going to mistreat his or her child is going to be higher. Well, that's not just behaviorally, it's literally in our genes, in our epigenome. So it's a responsibility. We have to be good to one another.
Very, very true. I'm with you on that. My business name is Karmic Kindness, so there's a reason for that. Kindness that we can give each other in the smallest ways, and I think that really also connects back to what we've been talking about. These small changes that can make a really, really big difference. So, JP, would you like to share with everyone where they can find more information about you on social media, as well as your website, and then also the Truvega device as well?
Yeah, sure. So I'm relatively easy to find. It's jperrico.com, jperrico.com. You'll also generally find me active on Instagram mostly, where my handle is the VNS guy. So THEVNSGUY. And always happy to provide a scientifically based, sometimes witty, snappy response to people. If you have questions and you want to DM me, I will try to respond. And I do post a lot of short reels that provide just a scientific underpinning for why everything from red light therapy to intermittent fasting to carnivore diet, all of those, just providing a little scientific understanding of where it comes from. And I think you might find them interesting.
I love that. And I'm actually thinking, I was like, I don't know if I follow you. I need to make sure that I do. I'm really woeful on social media. I need to get much better about that. But I am excited to go dive into that. And then as far as the device, JP has offered a discount to anyone who is tuning in. I will leave that in the show description as well, so that if anyone is interested, and that's truvega.com, correct?
Correct. TRUVAGA.com. And I'll get you some codes so that people who are tuning in can get a little discount for getting one. And I certainly
Yeah.
encourage everybody to do it.
And JP, if you're open to coming back on again after I have been working with the device for a little while, and I can share some experiences and, maybe do a deeper dive into some of the topics that we touched in on today, because I feel like this is such a rich and robust topic that I feel like we could spend an entire episode in just one small area of what we've talked about today, of which there have been many. So I feel like this is a jam-packed first episode of the series, and I'm really so pleased and honored that you came and joined me and are sharing this really, really important information with people, with science to back it, because there's a lot of talk out there and a lot of information out there that may not be completely fully accurate. And so I thank you very much for the work that you're doing and for being on the show.
Well, happy to be here and happy to come back. I'm looking forward to hearing about your personal stories about it.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Please stay tuned for any upcoming episodes that I am really excited to share with you, as well as the follow-up to this one with JP. Thanks again. And remember, we learn from one another. So please do share this episode with someone that you think may benefit. Bye for now.